and we will do a call to order. First, I'd just like to recognize we're on the land of the Muwekma Ohlone and Chochenyo tribes. And then I'll read the ceremonial quote. We have to consciously study how to be tender with each other until it becomes a habit. Audre Lorde. And now I'll do a roll call. So I'm going to go ahead and run through people as I see them in the participants tab. Abina.
Here.
Thank you. And go ahead and unmute and just acknowledge that, that you're here. Alina.
Here.
Thank you. Annie.
Here.
Thank you. Brian Weems.
Here.
Thank you. Charan.
Here.
Thank you. Trustee Jones.
Here.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Here.
Thank you. Ganesh. Could I try that again, Ganesh? Okay, you might have to check your microphone. Okay, Glennis.
Here.
Thank you. Greg.
Here.
Thank you. Jasmine.
Here.
Thank you. Jenny.
Here.
Thank you. Jessica Black is our guest. Jessica.
Here.
Cool. Thank you. John Roberts.
Here.
Thank you. Joyce Rakar.
Here.
Thank you. Kevin Goyle.
Here.
Thank you. Luis is here. Malcolm.
Here.
Thank you. Marie.
Here.
Thank you. Martha.
I'm here.
Thank you. Michael.
Here.
Thank you. Nosheen.
Here.
Thank you. Nerf. Nerfatima.
Here.
Thank you. Priya. Priya, we can't hear you. Let me come back to you. Roseanne.
Present.
Thank you. Sal.
Present.
And let me go back to Priya. Can everybody go on mute who's not speaking? Your audio is not working. Do you want to try calling in again? Okay, thanks. Samantha.
Here.
Thank you. And then Ty.
Here.
Awesome. Okay, so now we can go ahead and move to the agenda. At the request of the superintendent, I'd like to adopt the agenda with the amendment to delete the press release. So that would be item number 6. So if I could entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as amended, removing item number 6.
I make a motion to approve the agenda with the amendment, the amended,
Thank you, Joyce. Do I have a second?
I second.
Great. So if you could recall, if you go to change layout, when you go to those 3 dots, go to tiled, you can see a lot more of the participants. I will need people to please open your video in order to vote. This is kind of a test run. So if you could turn on your video. So all in favor of adopting the agenda as amended, please raise your hands.
I can't raise my hand because my video is not working.
Okay. Can you access the chat, Martha?
I can.
Okay. If you could type in the chat, yes or no. Thank you. And Charan is showing an example. Okay. Please lower your hands. All opposed? Great. The ayes have it. Okay. So if there's no objection, I'd like to adopt the October 22, 2020 meeting minutes that are in Exhibit A.
I have an objection, Antonio.
Yeah. Go ahead. Who is speaking? Oh,
Glenn.
go ahead, Glennis.
I believe there's a statement in there by Dr. Helmers about everyday speech, and I think it refers to the district using that program, and it's only being used at Irvington.
Okay, so would you make an amendment to the minutes to say the district uses an online program called Everyday Speech at Irvington or at IHS?
Yes, please.
Okay. Do I have a second? Great. All right. Actually, let me do without objection. Does anybody have any objection to Glynis's amendment to the minutes? All right. Seeing none, I'll go ahead and type that in. Are there any other objections to the minutes as written? Okay, so we'll go ahead and adopt the minutes as amended by Glynis's motion. So thank you. And let me go back to Priya. Can you turn on your audio? And I want to test that you can speak.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, great. Thank you. And I understand Martha is also coming back. Okay, so now we are at the receiving the presentation from the Oakland Unified representatives. So the structure of this item is we're going to go ahead and ask Jessica Black, who is a community organizer in Oakland, to speak for 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes. Then we've also asked Trustee Roseanne Torres to speak for 3 to 5 minutes. And then we're going to do 5 minutes of Q&A. Okay. So I'm going to hand off the mic, if you will, to Ms. Jessica Black. Thanks, everybody.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for having me. So I am Jessica Black, and I'm with the Black Organizing Project. We are a all-Black member-led community organization who is based in Oakland. We are the organization who has been fighting for almost a decade to eliminate police from schools, and more recently just had the George Floyd resolution to eliminate police from schools passed. I'm here today just to talk about that removal of police. When we were making the decision to continue to push for the removal of police, it was not a decision that was made solely on a budget. It was more of a decision that was made because of morality. There's a group of students, so in Oakland, Black students make up 24% of the population, but 75% of the students that are arrested, which is a huge disparity. Although the population is small, there's still a group of students who are being criminalized and who are being pushed out of education in a real way. And so we did it on the basis of morality. We did it on the basis that all children should be able to go to school, and children should be able to have places that have loving and caring adults, and not things that are more punitive or criminalizing towards them. In addition to that, we really spent a lot of time and a lot of energy conducting research around the criminalization. So when we talk about criminalization, we talk about arrests, but we also talk about suspensions and expulsions, because as we know, once a child is kicked out of school and goes into a community, and the community is pretty much defunded, there's not much for the child to do outside of outside of running to law enforcement or get in trouble. So that is kind of the work that we have done and that we have been continuing to do. So I know that you all wanted to talk about the implementation process of the George Floyd resolution. So how we seen this after we won this resolution is that this is not just about the removal of police from schools, but it's really about a transformation in school culture and climate. And so we see this, in order for this to realistically be a real and authentic thing, we see it as a way in 2 to 3 years, like a 3 phased out plan. So currently we are in the first phase of the implementation. In this first phase, what we are doing is we're looking at reasonable compliance. What is it going to take in order for us to completely be compliant with California Department of Education and have all the police removed out? In our second phase, what we're looking at is more of an innovative phase. And so we are big on community-driven process, because we believe that the people who are closest, who are most impacted, by the issue are the people who have the solutions. And so we really are pushing for a community-driven process in phase 2, where more people who are closest to the school sites get to come in and help reimagine what this transformation will look like. And then phase 3 is more of an evaluation phase. So test out the things that we implement in phase 2 and evaluate and see if those things are working, or if they're not working, what needs to happen. In order for this process to be a real process, we have to make sure that we have checks and balances in place. And we also have to make sure that we have the time allotted in order for it to be an authentic process. A couple of different things about this process is that the same transformation that we're talking about happening on school sites, we're pushing for it to happen throughout the district. So the way we went into this was, we went into this not as community stakeholders, but as co-conveners who have shared decision-making power. Oftentimes when you have large institutions that have been doing things in a particular way, there's a tendency to throw things together and then have community take a look at it, but community needs to have input on the beginning. And so we are co-conveners in the process, which means that throughout this process, we have shared decision-making. The other piece, like I was saying, that we really drove and we really honed in on was the idea of having this be a community-driven process. It's important for it to be a community-driven process because we keep us safe. It is the community that keeps us safe. It is not the police. We already see the damaging things that police actually do. Just this week in Philadelphia, I'm sure we all seen what has happened. So we are pushing that, and those are kind of the 3 phases that we are looking to. In addition to that, in order to dismantle,
Jessica, and if you can kind of somewhat wrap up in the next 30 seconds or so.
Got it.
Thank you.
So removal of police is just one thing. The next thing is, like, in order to end the school to prison pipeline, you have to dismantle the ideology, which is rooted in anti-Blackness. And as a part of that transformation, those are the things that we're addressing. Thank you.
And I'll take questions right after Rosie speaks. So Trustee Torres, if you can go ahead and speak. Do we still have you? Let me check.
Yes, I'm here. I'm listening, and then I took the camera off. I had just gotten home, so I was trying to get water and feed my pets who are staring at me and walk in and get on the computer again. So good evening, and I'm really glad that I was able to follow Jessica, because I was going to say there's this amazing organization in Oakland called Black Organizing Project, and the rest is history. So when I joined the school board, you get on the school board and you find out that one of the issues is that people would think you run for that position to make policy, to make change, and that everybody would agree, public education has been failing a particular group of students, and we know they are typically poor, and we know that the big majority of the poor children, especially in a city like Oakland or places throughout the Bay Area where there's quite a bit of diversity, would be students who are poor and Black, Brown, Asian Pacific Islander included in that, because we got deeper in our data around performance of students who fit into that category as well. The Asian Pacific Islander group, it turns out, had lower performance on math and English and graduation rates than even some Black and Latino students. And so once we disaggregated the Asian population, it wasn't all roses, right? So when you get on the board and you find out, how hard it is to actually make systematic, system-wide change, you have to look to your partners. And so I would say that beginning to end, this couldn't have happened without BOP. And when I got on the board, I came from the perspective of, when I ran, my campaigning was, I came out of the prosecutor's office. I felt that in my bones, I couldn't do a job where I was putting people away, not all, but putting a lot of people away for poverty, for lack of education, inability to get a good job, inability to be able to support your family and have the dignity of an honest day's work. And what happened to their education, K through 12? And so my clients couldn't read to me police reports, what the police said versus what they said happened at the scene when they got arrested. And I would say, well, did you graduate? Yeah, I graduated from OUSD, but you can't read? Something's not right. So when I got there, I met with Black Organizing Project. They were having a press conference on the fact that the more chance that a student has contact with police as a youth, there's a higher incidence of repeat contact with police, and there's a higher incidence of potential arrests, and the school to prison pipeline begins, right? So I knew that from my work as a criminal defense attorney, and I wanted to know more about what they were doing in the community. So in order to get to the place where we had the George Floyd resolution, you also then have, I'm 8 years on the board. Never have we not been cutting the budget. So we don't value education in our society. We don't have enough money. We value property owners saving their money and Prop 13, all that stuff, right? In the bigger political context. But we're starting to see a turn on the issue of private prisons for profits. And then sadly, the death of George Floyd, and it shouldn't have taken that many deaths for where we are now with racial justice movement. But in the end, the tenacity of an organization like BOP and other organizations, I think, that support them and that value the data and the work that they were putting in, and knowing that they presented to me, how Toronto had changed.
If you could wrap up within the next 30 seconds.
Yeah. So Toronto had removed their police department. I met with board members in Chowchilla that removed their contracts with the sheriff's office. So every year I was cutting librarians, teachers on special assignment, all these things. But then we had millions of dollars for police. So once this all came to pass, that we were going to cut again, this 8th and final year I'm on the board, I thought, this is where we're going to cut. We're going to cut the police department because we need our money, every single dollar, to go towards the education of all of our students, not policing.
Thank you very much, Trustee Torres and Ms. Black. So I will now open it up for questions. So I have Joyce Raykar and then Marie.
Sorry, it took a minute.
No worries.
Thank you for taking my question. For our first speaker, you had mentioned you're in the project in a 3-year phase, with the first phase being compliance, and you had mentioned something about being in compliant with California Department of Ed. Does the California Department of Education have a policing policy or an SRO framework that school districts can go to use? That was my question.
So what we're finding is that there's no requirement to have a police department or to have SROs on campus from the California Department of Education. It's not a requirement.
And I would say that if we were to look at statewide legislation, because I've been talking to my personal contacts, personal friends who've been elected to the Assembly and the Senate here, if we were to propose statewide legislation, and then there was a study done of all the districts that spend millions on policing or school security officers, and we were to put them side by side, I would guess that the majority of districts where it's primarily white students are not spending not even close to the percentage of districts that have Black and brown students. And that alone is going to show the racial disparity of how we spend our money.
So then I think my question really is what is the framework, step one, about compliance? What would a school district have to reference to stay in compliance of what?
So I'll allow this one follow-up, but moving forward, but go ahead, and then we'll take Marie's question.
Yeah. So for us, in terms of compliance, what we found is that every school district does have to have a safety plan. So if there's an earthquake, if there's, those type of emergencies, like, they do fire drills, that kind of thing. So being in compliant in that way, but it does not say that you have to have a policing entity.
And one point I would raise that I think, so the Oakland Unified has a police department embedded within its district, whereas we have an SRO program. So I would just draw that distinguishing factor. So now Marie, and we have 1 minute and 56 seconds.
Okay, so I wanted to thank Justice for coming and then coming back after you got cut short. last week. You mentioned that you've been working on this for 10 years, and we've been working on it less than 10 weeks. So I would ask for some advice on how to bring along some of the parents and community who are still in a place of police are wonderful, our community, doesn't hurt any students. Why are you trying to get rid of SROs?
Okay, thank you for your question. I'll try to be quick. I know we got a little bit of time. One thing I would say is the distinction that Antonio just made is really important. It took us 10 years to dismantle an entire police department. You all have contracts. People across California, across the state, are getting rid of the contracts. And they're doing it based on political. It's a political fight. It's a moral fight. So most people look only at money. It's not just about money. It's about making the decision to do the right thing for the right reason, right? And so with that being said, I would look to the data and the experiences that students are having, and why should we have a certain group of students who do not feel safe? We all know psychologically, when you don't feel safe, when you're afraid, you can't learn because your brain goes into fight or flight mode. So cognitively, you are blocked off at this point from receiving information and digesting that. Also, this is less about individuals. A lot of times people will try to make this about individuals. This is a racist institution. This is an institution that was created historically. It came from slave patrols. So blackness practices are embedded in this. It didn't start off for the right reason. So it's not just about one individual person. It's about the entire system of policing, and how this is not what we bring children to school for.
And if I could add one quick 30 seconds, I would just say that the biggest thing that I heard as a board member was, what about if there's a shooter on campus? We had 6 officers, 86 or so security officers who don't have guns and don't have weapons on campuses, just serving as security like you would see at the mall. You don't have highly skilled, highly trained people. So if there was a shooter, we were going to call Oakland Police Department. If you have a shooter, you're calling your local sheriff and city police department. If anything, this allows you to stop thinking you have a lot of security for your children and develop a better relationship with your larger agencies that have all the resources to deal with shooters and so on and so forth. That's a very problematic way of thinking, that what if we have an active shooter? It would have never fallen on the police department of OUSD anyway.
All right, so I'll go ahead, just go on.
And I would just say, in addition to that, so what we also know is that the active shootings don't happen in places like Oakland. That you're not seeing in the inner city a lot of students who are shooting up the schools. However, again, with the racial disparity and racism, urban students tend to get more policing, right? So it's just a fake narrative of safety. That's why with OUSD, we're not talking about building and developing relationships with Oakland Police Department. We're shifting and challenging the mindset to really be about safety does not equal police. There's more transformative ways that we can do this.
And I think the employees within a district, lastly, the employees within a district also should not be over reliant on a police or a school security officer. If a teacher doesn't feel safe because a bunch of students are standing by her car in the parking lot, she might want to consider why she teaches in Oakland, which is 90% students of color, 67% white teachers. She might want to consider her own racial bias. She might want to consider she hasn't been trained on racial issues. OUSD has failed. We've used the Eurocentric viewpoint for years too. We've failed our students. We failed our staff. They should not see things a certain way.
All right, y'all are going to make my job hard today. So I do have.
It's like the presidential debate.
I know. Let me recognize Martha. So I'm gonna learn to cut in more quickly. But Martha, you had a motion.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to extend time for a few more minutes so we can get our questions answered and hear more for the witnesses.
Sorry, so I need to define time. 5 minutes.
Make a motion for 5 minutes to extend?
Okay. Do I have a second?
A second.
Jenny seconding. Great. Okay. So I have a second. If everybody could raise their hand if they would like to extend time for 5 minutes.
Oh.
And you can also vote in the chat. Okay, please lower your hands. All opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. I'll put a timer for 5 minutes. And Martha, if you go ahead because you made the motion, and then I'll take people in the queue. Is that Malcolm? But go ahead, Martha.
So you have a community safety space. How often do you guys meet, and what other pieces do you use? Do you have social workers? Do you have other pieces to help with those other jobs?
Is that question for me?
It's for both of you, actually.
Okay. Repeat it, please.
So I realize that this is a really holistic space. When you say a safe community, it means more than just, stopping a shooter on campus. It's more than that. So I guess what I was saying is, do you have other people to fill those roles? Because, we have 5150s, we have these other pieces. When you have that conversation, what goes into that? Can you tell us a little more about what you're doing to
Yeah, so in the implementation phase currently, we actually we'll take 5150s, for example. We actually are looking at 5150s. And in this new compliance plan, what you will find is that we have developed and created police-free responses for 5150s because we all know that police are not the qualified people that should be dealing with people who are in mental distress. And so we do have that. We do have, we are in the process of putting that together. And I believe it'll be at the board meeting on November the 12th is when the first draft will come out.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I've been finding is conversation for a long time, right? Again, low level training for school security officers, put a uniform on, here you are. And some of them are great and some of them are just there, right? And for fights and breaking things up, or if a kid has drugs or something. So it's just a totally different perspective that now we're going to have culture peacekeeping ambassadors, which is a very different perspective for students who might be coming to school. We have a very large population of unhoused. We have a very large population of newcomers, unaccompanied minors without parents. They live with a relative or they live with a friend and they don't have money. They work 2 and 3 jobs, go to school full time, graduate on time, learning English, mind you. So we have a lot of students with a lot of other stressors. I found out that a lot of our school security officers, schools began to be reliant on them to deal with things that a staff person in the office could do. Like if a kid, needs to come and take medication, or if they need to serve a restraining order. We don't need to have a school security officer to deal with, say, a restraining order that a parent might want to show the teacher because, her ex could come and kidnap the kids, right? That's something the staff, the principal, the leadership needs to know, not a school security officer, right? That's not in the right hands per se, but they were becoming reliant on them for a lot of things that the main office needs to deal with. And so I feel like everybody will be more informed about who their kids are if they're not just pawning this off to someone else.
Thank you, Ganesh. And we have 1 minute and 57 seconds left.
Thank you for the time. Just had a quick question, and maybe you've answered this already, but as you look at eliminating police from Oakland School District, is there any one thing or a couple things which are like the hardest things to replace? Are there anything that they were doing which you're finding difficult to replace in this journey?
So in the implementation process, the hardest thing that we are going to have to come up against is work that Bob has already started to do. So while we were running the BOSS campaign, in addition to that, we came out with a report, which you all can check out on our website, where we talked about the $6 million problem. But in this very short period of time, there were like 6,000 calls to service. So we launched this campaign, the Black Sanctuary, and we started working closely with the teachers union around who's making these calls and why are these calls happening. So the biggest thing that we're going to be up against is the shift in a mindset, the reimagining safety, the dismantling implicit bias and racist practices. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah. And right now, I think that what goes hand in hand for an organization that is in education, that's our business, right? Not policing Black and brown kids. We are expanding. I passed an ethnic studies policy. It was only for 9th graders in high school. We're expanding my policy now for kinder through 8th grade, because why should ethnic studies be one class relegated to 1 year of all your years in education? That's not exactly sending a good message about ethnic people, cultural people, right? So again, we need to get into the business of education. And so that's going to also help to talk about the racial issues we're living.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So this wraps up the time that we have. All right. Y'all know what to do if you want to continue. Otherwise, seeing nobody. Thank you very much, Trustee Torres and Ms. Black. I really appreciate it. Appreciate your time. So thank you and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good
night.
night. Thank you.
All right, so turning back to the agenda, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Samantha, who can discuss the interim GenUp survey results. So we've allotted 10 minutes for this, so let me go ahead and put that. I believe her presentation should take something along the lines of 3 to 5 minutes, and then we can go ahead and entertain questions, discussion, etc. And I believe Elizabeth has shared the item. So Samantha, while you go ahead and start, I'm going to try to present the screen.
Cool, thanks. So I'm just presenting the preliminary data on the GenUp survey. Just some background. The survey was sent out last Monday, I believe. Had a rush to various voices from the different stakeholders. So I need to pull it up too. My bad. But we did send it out in both English, Spanish, and Mandarin. So so we can have a diverse sample size. The information here, I have collected all of the responses across the 3 surveys and created various charts to help us visualize the reports and responses. First and foremost, Antonio, can you go back to the first slide so I can give some thanks? Yeah, so first of all, thank you to GenUp for allowing us, this task force, to use and distribute this survey to collect data amidst the Fremont community. And then thank you to Superintendent Kamick, Leticia Salinas, I think I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, Greg Bailey and Barth Payne for distributing the survey across multiple platforms, which is why we were able to get so many responses, which is fantastic. Here is the survey sample size across all 3 surveys. So you can see, so initially we had a large wave of parent responses, and then as time went on, more and more students have responded, which is fantastic. The other chunks are from alumni, teacher, and staff. Next, and then we have a total of 2,363 responses. These are responses to the question of how many interactions have you had with FUSD employees. As we can see here, a fair majority of our survey sample have had no interactions with SROs. Teachers are more so within the 51 plus. And I mean, you can interpret the data how you will, but this is just general interactions amongst employees of FUSD or FUSD personnel, because technically SROs are not employees within FUSD. This is now filtered to be just students and alumni. So this is a pie chart for easy reading. We can see that the vast majority of students and alum have not interacted with SROs, a massive 77.9%. Others have, the next largest chunk is 1 to 5 interactions with SROs, and the others are a lot smaller chunk. I believe, yes. This chart is, this is a chart that is summarizing the responses about the quality of interaction with FUSD personnel across multiple personnel and within a scale of extremely negative to extremely positive, including not applicable, assuming that they might not have had interacted with said personnel. And again, we can see the trend that a lot of folks have not interacted with SROs. And this is the entire survey pop sample size. The next slide will just be students and alum again, because I wanted to make sure that we were able to see kind of on the ground. The students and alumni are probably those that are interacting with these personnel the most across the board. Again, similar trends. a lot of students have not interacted with SROs, and if they have a very neutral experience. And again, this will be in the agenda for you to look at more in depth if you are interested. This is a pie chart for easy reading. Again, it's, you know, a diversity in charts. Now this one is an interesting chart because it is broken down within the student and alumni population, broken down into racial and ethnic groups, specifically a baseline, which is the white students, and then under arrested populations, so Asian American and South Asian American, and then typically over arrested populations such as Black or African American and Latinx populations. The trend still stands where most students are saying that their interactions are not applicable to this question. So the assumption would be that they are not interacting with SROs, and the second largest chunk would be neutral interactions. What I do find interesting is that you'll see with an extremely negative and somewhat negative, there's a higher population of African American or Black students that are responding with that. And then there is also a kind of, there's a more even response within somewhat positive and extremely positive, with Latinx students kind of showing an extremely, or a larger chunk, a 12%, kind of small here, but 12% of the respondents, the Latinx student respondents, 16% saying they had extremely positive interactions with SROs. But those are kind of like the two things I wanted to point out there. I do want to say that to keep in mind that sample size compared to the total student population is still relatively small. I believe for the total number of Black students responding, it was at a rate like 6% of our Black student population responded, and then 3% of our Latinx student population responded. So keep in mind the small sample size when it comes to this data. Same with the total survey in general. Next slide. This is a chart that is outlining the responses across all surveys and all survey respondents for ideal mentors, teachers and counselors leading quite ahead, with SROs, admin, campus supervisors, secretaries, clerks, and custodial staff kind of trailing behind the kind of main individuals. This is the responses for who is the ideal educator for drug and vaping awareness. And you'll see that academic teachers and nurses and other medical professionals are very closely tied, with counselors coming in next and then SROs at the tail end. I did filter out any like kind of one shot responses. I don't really know how to like phrase it, but people would write in the others. And so if those options aren't seen here, it's because for the sake of a clean chart and succinct presentation, we couldn't put like the one-off answers. But yeah, this is a summary of that information. And this survey will be open, I believe, until the board meeting on November 12th, just for the sake of giving the board as much information as possible.
And we have seen a decay in answers, so there may be a natural cliff, at which point it makes sense to close the survey before then. But I'll go ahead and open it up for questions. We have 2 minutes left within the agenda time. I'm going to stop presenting because otherwise I can't see everybody. Go ahead, Glynis.
Thanks, Samantha, so much for the presentation. That was great. I did have a question just about definition, and I apologize if this was addressed earlier. But in terms of interaction, how was that defined when you asked the question? And I'm particularly focused on the data for just students and alums, with such a large percentage of students and alums not acknowledging any interactions with SROs. Was interactions defined as like large group presentations, small group, one-on-one, or are we thinking that means that they've never encountered that SRO in any of those formats?
Within the survey design, interactions wasn't defined, so it was largely up to the respondent's discretion. I can speak personally, as an alumni of American High School, I didn't even know we had an SRO largely, and I don't even recall having a presentation from them during high school. Now, that might be because I've redacted my high school years from my memory for any such reason. But I'm not surprised as an alumni of FUSD to see this kind of disproportionality.
Any other questions? All right, so we're going to close this item 25 seconds early. All right, so let me go back to the agenda. So the approach that I'd like to take on the final report, I understand it, it was large in length. So I wanted to go over the various sections and then reserve amount of time at the end, so 25 minutes for us to discuss, debate, adopt, etc. But first, we would go through the various sections. I did ask the members of the writing report team to first focus on the legal section because that's partly new to the task force. All the other materials should be pretty familiar. And so I'm going to hand it off first to Ty and Samantha, and I'm going to restart the clock. So generally, just so that everybody's kind of on board. So for this part of this, the presentation, it's just going to be 5 minutes of presentation with 2 minutes of questions. Then we go to the intro, which is 1 minute presentation, another minute of any questions, clarifying, so on and so forth. Campus safety, same thing, 1 minute presentation, 2 minutes total. And then we go to interactions, mental health, campus security, restorative practices. Those are all going to be just 2 minute quick presentations, and then 5 minutes total. So you get 3 minutes to ask questions. And then we turn back to legal. That's where it's in the report. We go to recommendations. That's 5 minutes presentation, 10 minutes total. Then we just generally take questions on the executive summary. And we move to that wider general discussion, which I've allotted 25 minutes for, but ultimately, it's the task force's discretion. But I'll go ahead and I will hand it off now back to Ty and Samantha. Let me also add time and then try to find that report in the agenda. So you can go ahead and go to Exhibit C, and it is the presentation in Exhibit C.
But before I get started, I'd like to just reintroduce myself. I've been pretty engaged with education. I've worked as a long-term sub in chemistry in East San Jose. I work with after-school programs teaching mock trial in citizen schools in Redwood City. I've been an avid math and science tutor. I speak at high schools, and I help students and mentor them. Beyond being a parent in this community, I'm also an attorney. I've worked in the juvenile court system in San Francisco. I've worked for the Northern District of California, and I've been an attorney working in big law, representing tech clients and high litigation. But I've also done a lot of pro bono work, and particularly in the area of education. And so, and part of that, I have, excuse the background noise. Part of that, I have formally and informally advised some families regarding education cases, including working with the Office of Civil Rights. So before I present again, I'm going to give that disclaimer of an attorney. What I'm presenting and what's in the report is not legal advice, it's general information. So there's no representation. I don't represent anyone. I don't represent students, parents, teachers, the district. And for actual legal advice, I would advise consulting an attorney based on circumstances for those things. So let's get into the presentation. I'm gonna lay out the district impact, which is a legal framework. And why is that important? Well, when we analyzed and we looked at this report and did a deep dive in all the subcommittees, there was a lot of information that led us to go down, well, why does it matter? Well, one of the consequences is legal liability. And so It's for that reason that there's a legal analysis part of this section to see what are the possible consequences. And part of that is a disparate impact. So disparate impact, when a policy or practice, although neutral on space, nonetheless has an unjustified, disproportionate, and adverse impact on a protected class, such as persons of color or students with disabilities. It's prohibited in the same force as overt discrimination is prohibited. What does that legal language mean? It basically, people get confused between disparate impact and disparate treatment. Disparate treatment is overt, intentional. I am going to discriminate you because of these certain things. Disparate impact is the intention might be neutral, but the result is still unfair. And so that's what it basically means. And they're both, in a legal sense, the same impact. Okay, so a disparate impact framework, how does that work in a case? So a plaintiff or someone who's basically starting a case says the district is engaging in a neutral practice that has disproportionate adverse impact on a protected group. There's a causal connection between practice and disproportionate adverse impact. And then once that plaintiff is able to establish that, the district must demonstrate a substantial, legitimate justification for the program. So why is it worth it, that program that is discriminating against a certain protected class of students? And then after that, if the district is able to do that, then the plaintiff can show there are equal effective alternatives that would result in less discrimination or disproportionality to a protected class, or show a pretext for discrimination. So we'll get into that once we go into the legal analysis section, but I want to try to get the data so that we can see what does that really look like. So Samantha?
Okay, so very quickly, this data was taken from the superintendent's report in 2018, and this tracks 3 years of arrest reports across various campuses, and it shows the ethnic background of the students that were that experienced this. As you can see from this data, we already see some disproportionality in terms of the enrollment versus the rate in which students are experiencing arrest. I'll keep it short because we'll go into this data in the report as well. Because we weren't able to receive data from the district or from the police department, the data letter that we sent out last week we haven't received a response, and I'm sure there's good reason behind that. So we had to defer to databases. So we used the civil CRDC out of the US Department of Education, so the Civil Rights Database, and which works largely with OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, the Cal Schools, which is a Healthy Kids survey, and one last one, DataQuest, which is also out of the Department of Ed, and this information was pulled from there. You will also see in the report data over 5 years. That is from the CDRC.
And if you could wrap up in 30 seconds.
Sure, so say hypothetical situation, a district has this, and a district could possibly, as justification, say the mission statement is to empower every student. So in a hypothetical situation, an SRO program helps ensure safety learning for students, teachers, and school administrators. Well, once we get into legal analysis, we can discuss whether they're actual alternatives or whether they're essential. And I think that wraps up the legal part.
Okay, we'll open it up to 2 minutes of any questions or comments. Martha?
Should I make a motion now, or should I hold on to that?
Yeah, so the motions will be at the point where we're doing the discussion or debate. So in the last 25 minutes, this is just to go through the report, make sure that we've all consumed it, or if we haven't, to have an opportunity to do so, and then ask any clarifying questions or make general comments.
Thanks.
Marie?
So Samantha mentioned that this data came from the Department of Ed. I want to clarify, it is Fremont Unified School District data though, right?
Yes, this is all data directly regarding FUSD, but the source that we pulled it from is from the Department of Ed.
Any other comments? Otherwise, we can gain time on this report. All right, let's go ahead and proceed to the next section. So let me go back to the agenda. Sorry. Okay, so if we could just go to the introduction. So Ty, if you want to take a minute to present on that. And for the benefit of the community, I'll go ahead and share the report. But Ty, you can go ahead and start.
Right, sure, thank you. The introduction is the introduction, and we, at this point, we understand most of the layout of the SRO program. It costs $2.5 million for 7 officers, 1 a sergeant, and directly to Fremont Unified, it costs $830,000 just for this year. And that's probably going to go up with baked in increases. And so that's the cost. And what we did in this report was, and through the subcommittees and everything around it, was really take a deep dive and let the facts and the information really guide us. And you'll hear you'll hear what we've already presented on campus security, mental health, as well as interactions. But you'll hear, the conclusions or what we're able to assess and synthesize. And speaking on behalf of a lot of the subcommittees I was a part of, I think change is hard to do, and the right thing is also hard to do. But what I'm reassured and I'm inspired by hearing and working with everyone is that there's a lot of different views, but everyone was passionate and really were engaged because they cared. And I gain hope by that to be able to do good, and when we see there's a need, to work together to make it better. And then let's get into the report to say something.
Just 1 minute. Any questions or any clarifications needed? Otherwise, we can move on. All right, seeing none. Now we can go ahead to the next part of the report, campus safety. That's a quick 1 minute presentation. Go ahead, Marie.
Hello. So I don't think there's really anything new in this section, but I just wanted to remind people that we defined campus security or campus safety as a combination of physical safety, mental well-being, and freedom from fear. And then in the report, we talked about the fact that all the campuses, all the adults on campus provide that. And in the final report, I did update the nurses section to include some information from last week more explicitly about how nurses do that by being able to see mental health issues when they come out as headaches and stomach aches. And then for the SROs, rather than delving into it here, they have the whole section later on. And that's it for this section.
Great, thank you. Any questions, clarifying questions? All right, thanks. Let's go ahead and move to interactions. Ganesh.
Thank you. So again, I did present the interactions report already once, so a lot of this would just be a quick run through that. The interactions report has 4 sections in it. The first one is around staff and students interactions. So main point there was that staff at school is working and behaving in place of the parent, which is great when you have like a medical emergency and they can take quick action and they are protected from immunity. But in terms of law enforcement, there is a duty to protect, and it's not very clear that site administration are aware that such a duty exists. So that was the main thing out of that. In staff and SROs, thanks to the work Samantha did, I was able to include survey results from the staff, and we found that 74% of site admins are in support of the SRO program. But when you look at the full district staff, that is about 49% in support, 36% opposed, and 14% did not answer. And the Fremont educators have actually voted overwhelmingly to end the SRO program and replace it with mental health professionals. In this section, we've already looked at the part that the SROs work for Fremont Police Department and are evaluated by them, and the district has no authority to appoint. But also that there is a complete lack of guidance or policy on what student activities should lead to SRO involvement. And we've made a recommendation, which has been captured over here, on having such guidance. For students at SROs, the main thing was the lack of parental notification when SROs are involved in questioning students. And I think that was a big point. And we've again recommended for that to be included. And finally, when it comes to free SROs and Fremont community, I've noted that there's a lot of good for the Fremont Police Department in terms of image building, but that's kind of like a peripheral function as far as FUSD is concerned. So probably not worth paying for. Thank you.
Any questions, comments? I have a minute for any clarifying questions or comments.
Antonio, this is Joyce.
Go ahead, Joyce.
I was just about to type something in the chat to ask you if I could share with the task force the results of CSEA's survey that I took.
Yeah, it's totally on topic, given the section that we just went over.
Okay, so I just wanted to share with the task force again and any buddy watching at home that CSEA represents about 780 classified workers here in Fremont Unified School District. We are clerical and IT and paraeducators. We are the non-teaching staff of Fremont. We did a survey and about 90% of the respondents were overwhelmingly in favor of the SRO program. So I want to also add that those employees work in our school offices and in classrooms, and so they, for the most part, have direct contact with the SRO staff. So I just wanted to add that into the public world.
Thank you very much, Joyce. So that concludes that section. So we'll now move to, is it mental health? Oh, yeah. So that one's one that I can do. So let me just give myself 2 minutes. So real quick. So we focused on mental health because part of the SRO's duties involve counseling. Also, we know from administrators and staff personnel that SROs are commonly used for doing 5150 assessments. And so we explored the alternatives to law enforcement doing 5150 assessments. If you recall from prior presentations, qualified mental health clinicians are able to do this. So for example, the CATT program, which will come live at the end of the year for Fremont, can handle that. We also looked at the disproportionality generally for students with special needs and disabilities. So there's some jarring numbers in there. And we were able to find in the OCR data, I know that we had been unable to get any information on the SRO program's impact on students with disabilities, but IDEA, which is it's right here, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so that's the nation's special education law. So although IDEA students only make up 9.7%, this is for 2016, 2017, 9.7% of the school district, they do make up 47% of in-school suspensions, 35.8% of out-of-school suspensions, 33% of expulsions, and 42% of referrals to law enforcement. And again, that was data for 2016, 2017, and this is sourced from OCR. We talked about mental health professionals and the fact that we do not meet the national guidance from their respective associations, and you can see those ratios there. And since I have very few seconds, just what happens on a day-to-day when we fall short of those ratios, we discussed that. And then counseling and SROs, and that was at the prior meeting where we made the recommendation that after comparison with mental health professional training, we recommend site administrators utilize the appropriate resources in counseling students. And now I'll hand it off. Oh, sorry. Are there any questions or comments about this section? Priya?
So is that IDEA data for FUSD specific?
Yes, that's correct. And then Trustee Jones.
Yeah, I'm concerned looking at the table M2, L4, and L5, which all have to do with the data surrounding IDEA, and seeing year over year disproportionate referrals to law enforcement. And I'm wondering, if I understand correctly, this data came from outside the district and outside the police department, because we don't keep that data. Is that correct?
It came from the Office of Civil Rights, which collects this data from the respective LEAs. So it's clear that somebody aggregated this data. It must have been someone either in the district or the police department. I would imagine the school district. But when we've asked the district to a local education agency, that's what I meant. Sorry. But when we asked the district for this information, they did not know that they had records to it. So it's unclear where that disconnect is. But someone is providing that data to OCR.
Okay, do we know what referral to law enforcement actually means?
Yes.
I mean, are these kids getting, are these arrests? Are these interactions with actual SROs? Are these maybe a counselor referring to law enforcement outside of the SRO program? What does that, do we know what that represents?
If I may, I can give you a definition. A referral to law enforcement is an action by which a student is reported to any law enforcement agency or official, including a school police unit, for an incident that occurs on school grounds, during school-related events, or while taking school transportation, regardless of whether official action is taken. So examples of this include citations, tickets, court referrals, school-related arrests, and are all considered referrals to law enforcement. So anytime they are officially, go talk to this police officer in any regard, that's a referral to law enforcement.
Okay, and is all of this related to behavior or incidents that happen during school time?
Ty, could you go ahead and copy that definition, because it does narrow that to like within school time or within school grounds. But if Ty could go ahead and copy that into the chat.
Will do.
Thank you.
Okay, and again, we internally don't collect this. I mean, we must be collecting the data, you're right, because it's getting reported somewhere, but we're not finding where that data is being collected internally to see the raw data or any details about these situations. Is that correct?
I don't know if this is helpful, but I will say that the CRDC, I keep forgetting, mixing up the letters. They collect the data and they do actually have a full public file with raw numbers. It's a hefty file. So if that is something that the district would be interested in, it is only for the year of 2017 and 2018, but I'm sure that they have the raw numbers somewhere, just because that file is available to the public, because I was able to download it and it's taken up a lot of space on my computer.
I think that is something that would be beneficial for, not necessarily the task force, but members of the task force to start connecting those dots of how OCR gets this data. All right, so unfortunately we did go quite a bit over mental health. So we will now move to diversion and that's Priya. So I think that's like, let me see real quick, just one second.
So I was going to talk about 601 and healthy choice, and Priya was going to talk about diversion.
Okay, so that's like a 2-minute.
We'll be fast.
Yeah, okay, great.
So when Priya and I interviewed Kathleen Brown about the diversion program, she also told us about other programs that Youth and Family Services funded by the city of Fremont has that our students do and can take advantage of. The 601 program is low-cost counseling services, and they generally offer them on a sliding scale to at-risk students. So maybe students having a lot of trouble with truancy because of mental health problems, and they don't have to be arrested. And then they also have an absolutely free drug and alcohol program that any adult on campus could direct a student to. And then they also run the Healthy Choices program, which a number of our schools are taking advantage of now, where they provide interns who are people who have finished up their education, counselors, but need their clinical hours. And it's very, very low cost to the schools. And in one of the appendices, I believe we list for this year what schools are getting what under Healthy Choice. Appendix E. Okay, Priya?
Yeah, so for context, Kathleen Brown is the woman who is in the SRO video, and Youth and Family Services, they also run a diversion program. So in this diversion program, if a student or a juvenile gets a citation, that can either be for usually for a misdemeanor, they can be referred to the diversion program. And in this diversion program, it's you're required to do 10 counseling sessions, and one before COVID, the students were also required to do a Santa Rita jail tour in order to graduate. And they have like a success is defined as not being rearrested within 5 years of graduating the program, and they have a 90% success rate. And you need a citation to be able to be referred to this program. So if we remove SROs, we need to ensure that students who are arrested are still able to get referred.
Any questions or comments? Reserved a minute for that. Sorry, I can't see anybody, so I have to stop presenting. Okay, seeing none, we can go ahead and move to the next part of the report. So is that campus security, Marie?
Yes. Yes, it is. So for campus security, are you going to share your screen again?
Yep, working on it right now.
Okay. While you're doing that, I think I have it up myself.
And
yeah. So for campus security,
of the group. So in Exhibit D, I believe there's the first report. There was the first draft, and then it was updated. And if you want to see any changes that were made between that first and second draft, there's a 22-page red line that shows all those minor edits. And then I've also linked it in the chat. Sorry, go ahead, Marie.
Yeah, so, and I do want to mention for the diversion program, they have somewhere between a 70 and 75% graduation rate. And then 90% of those, don't reoffend. So, which I think are excellent stats. So for campus security, we went into quite a bit of detail about how the school resource officers do and do not contribute to a feeling of safety on campus. We talked about the radio system, which I think I've talked about last week or the week before. And we have a recommendation that this radio system needs to be somehow that the district needs to work with the police department to sort of replicate that system, because it does cut down on response times. And the suggestion was to use a community service department, an officer in that department who is unarmed, but it's something the district and the police department will have to work out. So I talked before about feelings of safety. One of the things that I wanted to make sure people understood is that feelings of safety are not like minor. And as Jessica from BOP mentioned, if you feel unsafe at school, it does impact your performance. And so as we found out, there are definitely children who say having SROs on campus make them feel safe. Unfortunately, we also have students who have been harmed by them, as we see from the statistics and also some of the public comments that we got. The other thing that we talk about in here is complaints, which I think we talked about before, that we need the complaint system for any complaints with an SRO would have to be more transparent and involve the district. The Monday morning, okay, well, I'll skip the Monday morning then. So we talked about school shootings and active shooter drills before. I won't go into that. We talked about the fact that the SROs do not seem to be deterrent. We have updated stats from the Washington Post. They now have 237 shootings in their database, not 200. And in that time, they found one where the shooter was taken down by an SRO and one where they were taken down by police. And that was it.
Okay, can you wrap up with one or two more sentences?
For fighting and bullying, there were quite a number of suggestions in the appendix of how to train staff to deal with that. I do want to mention that there's a rumor going around that if we don't have SROs, teachers will have to tackle students who are fighting. And this is absolutely not true. Maybe Todd can go over it more, but in loco parentis does not mean that. It means that you have to act like a parent. So, and if you act like a parent, you will be legally protected. And all the training that we found actually discourages you from doing that and gives other ways to de-escalate this situation.
Okay.
And I
Any
think
clarifying questions or comments? Sorry, I have to stop presenting maybe. Let me see. Let me move it to a bigger screen. Okay, I would just add one clarifying comment. Under in loco parentis, you have a duty to intervene, but that doesn't mean you have a duty to physically get in the way of students. It means you can't walk by with your hands in your pockets as students are hurting themselves. You have to do something about it to protect order. Yeah, those are different concepts. Outside of that, any other questions or comments? Okay. Oh, Martha, go ahead.
Just a quick question. I assume there's lots of training and scaffolding around what you can and cannot do on a campus as acting as in loco parentis, right?
Yes, and I believe it's Appendix F where we list Stockton's sample of how they handle this and their recommendations. And we also have suggestions for dealing with bullying in the appendix.
Really good work. Thank you.
Okay, so moving forward, let's see, what's the next sections?
I think I'm next.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, hello everyone. So for restorative practices, the content is virtually the same as what I presented last week, I think. But we did add some data from studies. So for example, the American Psychological Association concluded that the punitive responses to juvenile offenders actually weaken bonds in the school community and they make reintegration a lot less likely. But in contrast, studies that focus more on responsive and restorative mechanisms are more effective, and they make students feel safer and more connected to schools. So I would definitely check out the articles that we've cited there because they're really insightful. And then another thing that we added, if you go to the appendices, that I wasn't able to cover this last week, but you can see the implementation process that they've used at both West Sonoma County and also OUSD in how they've approached implementing restorative practices. And then to reiterate, our district currently uses IIRP. There's a little table in comparison with IIRP, which is what we currently use, and Circle Up, which is what we've used in the past. And then just to reiterate our recommendations, because of the success of Circle Up at Robertson, as well as all the other factors that we've kind of outlined in the implementation of both of those, that led to a recommendation that the board revisits its adoption of IIRP as its outside vendor. And whatever program that the board selects, it should be long-term. It should provide training to all of the personnel certificated and classified at the school sites. And it should incorporate cultural competency and also provide each school with additional support if they need it. And I'm not sure how much time I have, but the broader recommendations that we have for this
27 seconds, so 30.
Implementing community building, a culture shift, and engagement, like Mr. Sal Herrera said last week. It's all about the culture shift. You can get all the training, but it won't really take root unless you have that culture in your school and your staff, and that comes from administrators, it comes from the school, the superintendent. And then also there needs to be an evaluation process and new discipline guidelines and board policies on how they should be used. So it's clear to staff when you should use them and how you should use them. Thank you.
Any questions for anybody else? All right. All right, let's see what is next. Okay, so we'll hand it back to Samantha and Ty. I believe this is 3 minutes.
Yeah. Yes, thanks. For efficiency's sake, can you scroll to table L6? We've already talked about the disproportionality in terms of the effect on the students that are under IDEA, but this is a table that really outlines over time the disproportionality factor across students within the groups of African American and Black and Hispanic and Latinx students for arrest compared to their enrollment. So these numbers are terrifying. If we look at 2016 and 2017, we see a disproportionality factor of 10, with Black students making up 22% of the arrests while only making up 2.2% of the enrollment. Same thing with 2017, a disproportionality factor of 12.2, where those students made up 24.4% of arrests while only making up 2% of enrollment. So these tables really speak for themselves. If you would like to know more information, there is a more detailed table in the appendix. I believe Appendix J really outlines the suspension both in school, out of school, and law enforcement referral. And I believe I'm forgetting one more thing, but it is in Appendix J for more in-depth analyses. And I also want to point out Table L7, which is about academic success, right? We've been talking a lot about discipline, but I know as a student that has gone through FUSD that academic success is something that we take very seriously, especially our A through G requirements. And as you will see, Black and Brown students have a far lower percentage than the total student body of meeting the UC and CSU requirements. This is data from 2017 to 2018 from DataQuest, which is out of the Department of Ed. They also have 2018 to 2019 data, but it's not in our report. I was trying to pull it up in the interim, but it took too long to load. But we can see that the drop between the entire student population to that of the students that are more that have been disproportionately impacted with arrest data is that they are not graduating with those requirements, or they're graduating at a far lower rate. And I would highly recommend that everyone on this task force go and look at DataQuest at this data to really see the impact across multiple ethnic groups, because I want to echo what Trustee Roseanne Torres said, that there are populations that are not typically looked at, such as the API community, so the Pacific Islander community, and then Indigenous groups as well, that are also being impacted in an academic way. We can also see that graduation rates are lower than the average as well. But I'll throw it to Ty for the more legal implications of such. Sorry, I really
again. So
do we have an objection to giving Ty 1 minute to finish his part? Go ahead, Ty. I'll give you a minute.
Sure. So what does this all mean? I mean, I laid out the legal framework from the beginning, but now we've listened to this SRO program that could be neutral on space, have disparate impact on very protected classes. You're seeing, for example, the students with disability population not representing even 10% of the general population, but almost 50% of all referrals to law enforcement. You're seeing 2% of the population that's Black getting a quarter of arrests. I mean, these exponential numbers are 10x. You know, it's pretty striking. And beyond that, if we go back to the legal framework, why are SRO's programs essential? You know, and is it essential here? And does it justify? And if you look at SRO programs in general across the U.S., across California, not all schools have it, and schools are removing it. There are alternatives, as we've seen in this 70-page report. There are alternatives, and to better fit and satisfy some of the requirements for Fremont specifically, some of the mental health and 5150s was by the administration's own survey said that's the #1 use of an SRO. Is that the person who's best equipped to respond to a 5150, or someone who is at the fraction of the price, right? And so,
all right, Ty, and I'll ask you to wrap up in a sentence or two.
And looking at that, not only is it the right thing to do for the students, there's going to be legal liability, and based on that. Okay.
Trustee Jones.
Yeah, I think I think what the community has been asking for all along is this local data, because I think most of us are aware of disproportionality with state and national data. And I think we had hoped that somehow that wasn't happening locally, but it looks like 5 years worth of data indicates that it is. And I'm wondering, compared to maybe state or national data, is our disproportionality essentially reflective of national disproportionality? Is it better? Is it worse? How do we compare with the disproportionality we see nationally?
That's a really interesting question. I think that if we had more time, and I think it would require a true legal analysis. I think the indications of this preliminary data and the data we've looked at and just anecdotal, we kind of exceed the trends. I mean, a 10x, especially with the students with disability and the Black population. I can only say I haven't done a complete study, right? So,
Ty, if I may answer Trustee Jones' questions. So I think at the national level, when I looked at it in 2018, Black students were, again, nationally being arrested at either 3 or 3.3 times the rate of white students. So you see the disproportionality factor between 2015 and 2018 of 10 times their population, but white students were being arrested at 2 times their population rate. So that's still a 5 times disproportionality, like when you compare Black student arrests to white student arrests in Fremont. So unfortunately, we are exceeding the trend for the time that I looked at it in 2015 to 2018. And that's about time on that section. Sorry, I don't multitask very well, so I just mute myself instead of muting the phone. So, all right, so we can now go to recommendations.
Okay, can you scroll down to recommendations? I'm in charge of that, by the way. So I want to start off with the 2 newer recommendations, so recommendations 2 and 3, because we've been, not newer, but we've talked about them extensively. There's just a summary of recommendation 2, which is expand effective, safe, and supporting learning environments. This is in summary just creating a safety plan across FUSD of the various campuses, echoing Sal and our Ms. Black and Ms. Torres, that we need to have a culture shift in Fremont Unified, meaning we need more mental health professionals, we need to invest in restorative justice, we need to invest in de-escalation training, and a whole slew of other things, as you will see in this recommendation. We need to make sure that the students, our most fragile students, are being reintegrated into our school system and being supported instead of saying, well, you guys figure it out. So putting those policies and those practices in place and making sure that we are abiding by them will only benefit our students and only help the population as a whole. Recommendation 3 is to restructure our relationship with how we use law enforcement in schools, specifically as we've seen throughout the various sub-task force and the task force meetings at large. We don't have policies, or at least we don't have overarching policies on how law enforcement interacts with students, when parents are notified, in what instances law enforcement are involved in school, or in school instances. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But really having the district adopt these policies and create an MOU with the police department to really outline how things are supposed to work, because that data shows that we do not have that information down, specifically citing the admin survey. And then we'll get to the main recommendation. Oh, or we're going to go down. Oh, okay. Sorry, there's a little lag. So our main recommendation amidst all of the report writers, and after really thinking and looking at the data and reading public comment and really understanding this information inside and out throughout the time that we've had together. The major recommendation of this report is to remove the SRO program from Fremont Unified, because at the end of the day, this is a reactionary program, and this is what we've been doing, reacting to issues and not addressing the issues at the root. From the data, we can see that, I wasn't saying that. Sorry, I'm referring to Sal's comment. So we can see from the data that there is a population that is being affected and is under-resourced in Fremont Unified, and they are largely being sent to law enforcement, and they are being over-disciplined at a ridiculous rate. We also recognize that this program does not have policies or regulations on how we use it across campuses and within this district. So you can actually read in more about the specificities, but overall, we need to address this issue. And by and large, the data has kind of led this report to say that we need to remove this program.
Okay, so I have Joyce in line.
Samantha, I have a question about the draft report you're reading, and you referenced recommendations, and so I'm curious to find out how you came to the what was the process that got you to the point of a recommendation on this report?
So these are recommendations that all of the writers came together and worked on based on the
who could you name who the writers of the report are?
So I was in charge of data. We had primarily, it was the primary writers of all the subtask force. So I believe off the top of my head, I don't have a list in front of me. It was Ganesh, Priya, Marie, Ty, Antonio, and myself, because we were primary writers, or at least had, I mentioned
right.
Marie. Yes.
So the question is, how did the writers of each section of the report come to the conclusion of a recommendation? Did you, in each task force, poll the committee members of that task force, and you brought forward a consensus of your recommendations as the writer of the report?
So if I may, we can avoid back and forth, but I certainly encourage queuing. So all of the recommendations, pretty much all of the recommendations in step 2 and 3 have all been adopted by both the sub-task forces and the task force in the various reports as we proceeded along throughout the meetings. As noted in some of the comments, those recommendations were not always supported unanimously, but they were adopted through a majority of either the sub-task forces or the task forces. The only pretty much new recommendation that the report writers are bringing to you is in step 1. But other than that, we should all be pretty familiar with the recommendations that are in the rest of the report.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yep. And then I had Marie in line, and we have 50 seconds. Obviously, we can.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think there's only 2 recommendations, other than the big one, that weren't in that weren't voted on by the task force, and these came up later from later research and are really right in the spirit of the things that we had already agreed to. As in terms of the overall one, I don't know if Mr. Herrera would like us to, Verbeck Herrera would like us, each report writer, to talk about how we came to that conclusion? Or do you want to?
If we end up extending time, right now we're due for 20 seconds. The other one point I would note is that the data that we'd requested all along had not been made available until the Office of Civil Rights released information for the 2017/18 school year. And that was done mid last week. Okay, so do people want to extend this part of the time? So the way this is structured, right? So we're at recommendations. We were doing clarifying questions. Then we're going to just quickly go to a review of the executive summary. Mostly it's just going to entertain any questions. And then we get into the general discussion. And that's where people will be free to make debate, also ask clarifying questions and engage in discussion. And that's where motions would be appropriate. So for now, we're just going to move to the executive summary. And let me just find that in the report. So essentially, and I would guide this to both the task force and the community, to the extent you have 5 to 10 minutes of time, given that this is such a large report, I would recommend you read the executive summary and the recommendations tabs. And then to the extent, your interest is piqued as to any specific recommendation, refer back to the relevant section. That is relevant, sorry. So are there any, this is a pretty short section, so I won't do a presentation on it. But if I could entertain any discussion points, otherwise we're free to move on to the general discussion. And I'm going to go ahead and stop presenting for now. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to go ahead and put 25 minutes to start, our general discussion. Again, this would be where it's appropriate to ask clarifying questions, make motions, engage in debate, as we've done before, to really advance this step here. And as noted, to the extent that there is new information in this report, for the most part, it would be the legal analysis, and that's why we made sure to present that at the beginning, and the recommendation in step 1. And outside of that, for the most part, you should be pretty familiar with all of this material. Please, everyone, don't rush in all at once. Does anybody have any clarifying questions? I want to acknowledge Joyce for asking more questions about the report writers. I would remind the task force that I believe the October 8th meeting is when we assigned the report writers to start beginning to work on a final report. And we got, busy to work. And this is what we were able to deliver to you in the timing that we had.
Kevin has a question.
Oh, great. Sorry. Yes, Kevin.
Oh, yeah. I just had a quick question about the recommendations and its similarities to the Oakland, so like 3-phase suggestion. I'm wondering if we're planning for it to be implemented in the same way as part of the recommendation, like a 3-year proposal. It seemed like within the second recommendation, at least, there was a clear deadline for by December 31st. We would have an evaluation of what resources need to be dedicated to to fill in the gaps or to fill in educational deficits after eliminating SROs. I'm just wondering if we're like borrowing that same structure, and if we can refer to Oakland as a reference, as like a party of that.
I could go ahead and answer that question, but I'll defer to any other report writer. If not, I'll go ahead and clarify. The December 31st, 2020 deadline would be to implement that, that community-driven process in order to begin. Actually, let me go ahead and share my screen again so that the community can benefit from our conversation. Just one second. So I believe you're referring to develop by no later than December 31st, 2020, an inclusive community-driven process involving parents, students, educators, school administrators, student support staff, and other community partners for completing a revised district safety plan with strategies for enhancing student learning, safety, and well-being within the district. In part, what drove this recommendation is the acknowledgement that this is a complicated situation. There is no easy decision, and I think that speaks to the amount of work that the task force did over the course of the past 10 weeks. There are a variety of functions that SROs currently undertake, and also I think there is concern in the community about what happens to a campus safety without police officers there. So it would be important for it to be a community-driven process to initiate after a board makes a recommendation to start implementing that vision and really narrowing out the details. Obviously, these recommendations are pretty detailed. And Annie, I see you in queue, and I'll go to you shortly. But nevertheless, I think what we've discovered is that it is a nuanced topic. It requires further analysis, and we would encourage the board to create that community-driven project. Annie.
Yes, I move to adopt the report as written.
So we have a motion to adopt the report as written. Do I have a second?
I can second it.
Okay, so I have a second from Priya. And so now we can go ahead and, okay, so Sal would like to line up for debate. So first, the speaker of the motion speaks, then I'll take people for and against, much like we did in the first couple meetings. If you have a clarifying question, let's say you don't understand what the motion is or something like that, please go ahead and raise your hand and point out in the chat that you have a clarifying question. But otherwise, we're going to go ahead and do debate, and that's the where you go very back and forth between people in favor and people against until we exhaust debate. Annie, I'll go ahead and give it to you to speak.
Yes, thank you. I found the report in its entirety, frankly, shocking. Knowing the national climate and state of America, I had a hunch that there probably was some disproportionality, maybe some problems, but I did not know and would not have guessed that the disproportionality was this much, that there were problems from a legal perspective, and how much other personnel like nurses or teachers or school psychologists really benefit students. So considering everything in its entirety, I'm of the opinion that the SRO program is more of a detriment to the students at FUSD than a benefit. And we should, and the district rather, should spend their limited resources and limited money on programs that greatly or that benefit the students more.
Thank you for keeping it brief. I'd like to remind speakers that we've adopted task force rules to please limit your comments to 2 minutes, and that was 1 minute, so thank you. Sal, are you speaking against the motion? If so, then you can go ahead and go next.
Yeah, I just want to start by saying that I do not support the elimination of SROs. As a school administrator in the Fremont Unified School District for 22 years, the SROs have been a great resource to keep my campus safe, as of my colleagues. I want to be clear that the disproportionality of suspensions, expulsions, and arrests are not something new in Fremont Unified. Matter of fact, this is shared throughout our state in multiple school districts. I want to talk about school culture. I think school culture does not start with the elimination of SROs. The transformation of a school culture starts with staff. And I think that that needs to be addressed first before we consider eliminating SROs, because the elimination of SROs does not start the process of a transformation. It's the school staff, our beliefs, our biases, and addressing the way we practice as a site or school staff, not necessarily the SROs.
Thank you so much, Sal. So I'll go ahead and go to Glynis now.
Thanks, Antonio. I wanted to speak on behalf of eliminating the SRO program. So we started off by talking about the goals and objectives of the SRO program and found it tough to find those goals and objectives and how they're being measured. The next thing I wanted to talk about is some of the survey information in terms of the student interaction versus surveys like, should we keep the SRO program? So I think it's more important to understand the interactions that students have, and overwhelmingly we've heard tonight that the majority of students don't have interactions with the SROs versus people saying in surveys, should we keep them? So I think that's important to remember as well. As a program specialist in special education, the mental health piece is very close to my heart, and I want to speak on the fact that we seen data presented from the district as well as through this task force that the 5150s have increased significantly. And we've heard from the mental health subcommittee that there are other agencies that can provide support in that area. As we think about the needs increasing in mental health prior to COVID, what's happening during COVID for students and hearing from our mental health professionals and what we would expect or project as we return to school, I think increasing the mental health professional support for our students is extremely important. As we look at the next 2 years and think about budget constraints, we will have to make some tough decisions. And I think as we think about our students as the center of those decisions, what's going to be the best way if we have to make those cuts, where do we make them? And then again, at the end, the disproportionality and the legal piece. That information and data was pretty glaring. I think it says to us, we have to put students at the center of this. And if students are being disproportionately impacted, we need to have that be a big part of our decision. So if we think through all those elements with the student at the center, I think that drives us to a decision of transitioning from that SRO program and then thinking about how we support students better.
Thank you. That was exactly 2 minutes. Appreciate it. And now I have Joyce Rakar.
Thank you. Glennis, I agree with a lot of what you said. I'd like to clarify what I'm about to say. I represent employees with the district, so and I represent what they have asked me to represent. There is a lot of important things in that report, and I'd like to say thank you to the writers of the report. Thank you for the detail. There's some really important things in there that we could implement and that we should be implementing. Training of our staff and keeping data and tracking the interactions ourselves. But my members have made it clear to me that I will not be able to support the adoption of this report because overwhelmingly they would like to keep the SRO programs in place. So I just wanted to represent what the CSEA members have sent me here to do. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we have Marie.
Thank you. So I would like to say that when I first started on the committee and we found all these problems in the interactions group, it seemed like they could be fixed. But as we continued to research, especially the mental health aspects that the SROs seem to be handling badly and will never get enough training to replace a certified mental health counselor, my views started to shift. And in the end, this is really about the students. I understand the staff loves SROs, but I can't sleep at night thinking about that girl who was dragged to the mental hospital against the advice of a mental health professional. And I think about all of these kids who are being disproportionately disciplined for things that their white students, their friends, don't get disciplined for. And I just cannot support having SROs. And I do not think we can make a culture change to restorative practices and restorative justice as long as SROs on campus, because the adults will continue to depend on them. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. So now I have Malcolm.
Thank you, Antonio. Yeah, I'd like to speak against the motion. I'm a parent representative, and I've reviewed, I think, every single bit of data available to the task force based on the public comments and the sentiments, both those submitted to the board or the district, the surveys of the administrators, the students, the parents, the classified staff, and more. And it is my view that a strong majority support maintaining the SRO program. I do think that the task force has identified a lot of problems with the program. The fact that there are no measurable goals, no records, no measurement of student outcomes, even for disciplinary matters not involving SROs. that seems to be a pretty massive failure. And, you know, I kind of asked myself the question, well, how the heck did we get here? Why do we have a program with no goals, no records, no policies? And that gives me no confidence at all that a replacement program will do any better. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. And so now I have Kevin.
Yes, I would just like to speak to the public input forums and public input in general, which has been overwhelmingly in support of SROs, or at least the GenUp, or at least the FUSD Surfboard E survey has been. I think our data report here is novel, it's new, and insofar as it presents a very different narrative than what we started out with in this task force, which is that we didn't know the impact of SROs on students here in FUSD. The only indict we really had was a national tendency, which we had to prove somehow an exception to. And much like Annie, I had a sneaking suspicion that Fremont is not that unique. It's not that unique enough to break such a national tendency. But now that we know, as a student myself, that I know that SROs on my campus are not inclined to guarantee everyone's safety, and that I know now that they disproportionately affect Black and brown students, that I could not ever be comfortable with SROs, especially after this evaluation of the disproportionate impact of SROs against Black and brown students here in FUSD. I do not know. I still don't understand. I really want to question how Mr. Hoare and Mr. Herrera are defining safety. Whose safety are they really considering when they attempt to block this resolution? And I want to pose that to Ms. Jones if she's here. So really bring that discussion to the board.
So it's been 2 minutes, and then I would ask people to make their to limit their comments away from the personal. But that question is before you. So I will now go to Brian.
Thanks, Antonio. I just want to say a few things. One, thanks for everybody. The amount of time that this has taken is a lot, and you're taking a lot out of your time. I know a lot of people have done a lot of effort as far as doing a written report. We're all here for students, and for the most part, making sure they're safe, but obviously being educated in so many different ways. So we are leaders of the site. I've been a principal for years. I know Sal has. We are going up an uphill battle that we will not stop fighting. We're dealing with a systemic of decades of disproportionality in many different ways. We talk to our staff. We keep this in mind while we're hiring new staff members. We talk through PD in August, staff meetings throughout the year, and hoping that it gets better and better. We hate to see, as administrators, to see this SRO program leave, because it is it's another opportunity for us to achieve what we feel like we're achieving. But we just hope that if it is gone, which I see this is kind of the direction we're going, is that we put in place, like many of you said, put in place areas and personnel that can help us achieve what we need to achieve. And that is a level playing field and making sure that every student, no matter what their color is, has the opportunity to be safe and educated.
Thank you, Brian. And then we'll go ahead and go to Ty. And the only speakers I have after are speakers for, so that will exhaust debate if no one speaks against after Ty.
I really appreciate what you said, Brian. And I think it shows how much you care as an administrator as well. I think the truth is SROs can quickly respond to certain things, but is that in the best interest of that student and overall culture of the school? I agree that without the program, there should be things in place because we need that structure. We need that those things that to help the students. But to have a full-time police officer on a campus, what does that mean to a student? Would you have a police officer in your house? These students have to be at school for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, and to have a police officer who might be profiling them, and just imagine a black student who just after the Breonna Taylor incident coming to school, and they know this SRO has talked to them before, and he's just in a bad mood, and he wants to check up on this student. How is that student supposed to react? You know, we've already seen research after research of the more interactions you have with a police officer, the more likely you'll be in prison, more likely of not being successful in education, having those opportunities. That's why college campuses, most of them do not want a police force on campus. They want them to be able to make simple mistakes. And for our school district, what do we say about adolescents being criminals, right? Are they criminals? You know, and what is the response? Is it better to, police officers are trained for criminality. Is this legal? Is that not legal? Not what's the behavior. School psychologists, counselors, administrators, they're looking out, how can I help this student be successful in life overall? Not just education, but a police officer has a very narrow job. And in the scope of how they're trained, that's just not the dynamic that's appropriate in schools. And I just want to just leave it at that.
Thank you. Do we have any other new speakers against?
Antonio, can I make a motion to call for the question?
Well, actually, it's about to be called if we don't have any speakers,
Good.
but that would be in order. So why don't we try
Can
this
I
new
make an
motion out?
amendment?
Go ahead, Marie.
I would like to make an amendment that we accept the report as is, but let the report writers make one more pass to clean up the endnotes and any spelling errors that we know are in there and other cosmetic changes.
All right, so I've heard an amendment, and Joyce, apologies, I thought the debate was over, and then Marie made a motion, so but you can go ahead and follow up after this amendment to do the same. Okay, so the motion, as I understand it, is to amend the adoption of the report to allow the report writers who've been identified previously in the meeting to do essentially cleanup changes, fix endnotes, any spelling mistakes, or other cosmetic changes. Is that correct, Marie?
That is correct.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Would you like to speak in favor of your motion, or would you like it to go to debate? I mean, sorry, to a vote?
I don't know that I have to speak very much to it, except for that I know some of the footnotes are a little screwed up and I would really like to fix them. So,
thank you for speaking in favor of your motion. Are there any speakers against?
I just had a clarifying question.
Go ahead, Calvin.
We're maintaining the language of the report as is. I guess when you refer to cosmetics, it doesn't mean like redoing sentences if they aren't right. It means more like just spelling errors and like making the report look better.
Yes.
Yeah, the way I understood the motion is non-substantive cosmetic edits.
Non-substantive. Because then if we made substantive, we'd have to come back again and do it all again. So.
Okay. And do I have any speakers against? And otherwise, I need to process Sal's motion. Okay, so the fun thing about Robert's rules is you can have an amendment to that second degree. So I want to know, Sal, is this an amendment to the amendment or an amendment to the main motion? If so, we can wait until this amendment resolves.
Well, I'd like to make a new motion, if I may.
Oh, no. So right now, there's the motion that's on the table, which is adopt the report. We're currently dealing with adopting the report with the ability for the report writers to make certain essentially cosmetic changes. That one will resolve, and then you could either amend that main motion that's below, but a different motion altogether would not be in order at this time.
Okay.
But you can amend the primary once we're back to it.
All right. If you would just let me know when I can make another motion.
Sure, I'll explain that right after we resolve this. Okay, so right now we are only dealing with amendment. So it is to amend the primary motion. We're only voting on the amendment, which is allow the report writers to do one new pass to fix endnotes, spelling, and other non-substantive cosmetic edits. All right, so if you could turn on your cameras, all people in favor of the amendment to the motion, please raise your hands. Okay. All opposed, please raise your hands. Okay, so, and I don't count abstentions, but that motion passes 15 to 3. And so now the motion that's on the table is that it's the one that's amended, right? So that we, okay. So Sal, if you would like to make a motion, you'll have to extend for time because now we've exhausted our time for this matter. So we would go to the motion that's on the floor, which is to adopt the report, but to allow report writers to make non-substantive cosmetic edits to footnotes, spelling, to give the writers a second pass so that they can make any spelling or footnote changes or any other non-substantive cosmetic edits. Oh, and that was 17 to 3, sorry. All right, so that's the motion that's before you. And I'm gonna restate it because it's an important motion. All right, so we are voting on adopting the report and also giving the report writers a second pass to be able to fix any spelling mistakes, endnotes, and any other cosmetic, non-substantive changes. All right, so all in favor of this motion, please raise your hands. And please keep them raised. Okay, all right, and now please lower your hands. And now all opposed, please raise your hands. Okay. So that passes 18 to 5. If I see some things in the chat about making motions, so you would have to move to extend for time because we've exhausted the time in the agenda for the report, and then you could go and make your motion. So that's how you would want to make any motions at this time.
I would like to make a motion to extend time for 1 minute.
Okay. All right. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Great. All right. So all in favor of extending our time for 1 minute, please go ahead and raise your hand. All right. Please keep your hand raised. All right. All opposed? So lower your hands, please. All opposed? All right. So the ayes have it. So go ahead, Sal. You can speak.
Yeah, I would like to make a motion to accept the report, but amend the recommendation to the report.
So that would be a motion for reconsideration, and that would only be allowed for people who voted in favor. So if someone who voted in favor of that can bring a motion to reconsider, because that has now been resolved.
That's what I was asking earlier in my chat.
Right, and then I directed you to make a motion to extend for time when we, after we had accepted the amendment. Because that's when the, yeah, go ahead.
I would hope that people on this task force would at least hear me out on an amendment to the recommendation as a
So let me help you construct it, if possible. The report has already been adopted with the recommendations in place. You're effectively working to reconsider the motion that we've all properly adopted.
Yeah,
but
what I'm asking for is an opportunity to just speak on behalf of the recommendation with an amendment to that recommendation from the final report. I voted, the report itself is in whole, I understand that. However, I'm talking specifically to the recommendation from the task force.
Right. At this time, that would not be in order because we have adopted the report along with its included recommendations. But if you would like to extend for time again to make a comment or engage in discussion, that's totally available.
Yeah, I requested a 1 minute extension to that time.
Yeah, we did. So now we need to do it again because we just exhausted it. So if you'd like to make a new motion, or actually, if there's no objection, Sal would like to speak for another minute. Does anybody have any objection to that? Hearing no objection, go ahead, Sal.
Yeah, I would like to amend that. Well, I don't know if that's the appropriate phrase at this point, but I definitely understand that there was a lot of time taken in the actual report building. I mean, we've all spent hours researching and meeting and having, courageous conversations about a lot of different things. I would ask that the recommendation, because what's come out of this, I've been able to transform a school in an alternative setting over the last 14 years, and I know what it takes in order to do that. So it starts with culture. You have to shift the culture and the practice. And I mentioned this in the chat, it starts with staff. So I would ask that the recommendations be more focused on staff and policy and buy-in and spending our time focusing on that, because that's where the meat is. The SROs are a small part of that staff. But if we're talking about a culture shift and practice, it starts with staff. And
go ahead, if you could go ahead and wrap up.
So my recommendation would be to focus our energy more on implementing and having discussions around those items with staff than eliminating SROs.
Thank you. So because you voted against, you're not able to make a motion to reconsider, but if anyone who voted for is willing to do that, they can do so. Marie, is that a motion to reconsider? Sorry, can you speak up? Are you making a motion? You're on mute.
Sorry, I pushed the wrong button. I just want to tell Sal that he needs to read the report because everything he's saying is in the report.
That's not in order. So just motions, because we've exhausted time now. Hearing no motions to reconsider, we've now adopted the report and we are moving.
I motion to reconsider.
Okay. So Michael, did you vote in favor of the report?
Yes, I believe I did.
Okay, great. So we have a motion to reconsider the adoption of the report with the ability for the report writers to make spelling corrections plus, what was it? Edits to the footnotes and any other non-substantive cosmetic changes. And so Mike would like to reconsider the adoption of that motion. So do I have a second?
I second it.
Okay, so we have a second. So we are now moving to reconsider the adoption of that report. So if people could vote in favor. So once we vote to reconsider, then if that passes, then we can adopt a new motion. But otherwise, if that fails, the report stays adopted. All right. So all in favor of the motion to reconsider the Okay, I have a point of information.
Just point of information. What is the vote threshold for a motion to reconsider? Is it 50% or 2/3?
That is a great question. So let me do some very quick Google searching. Thanks. So give me a minute or two because I want to make sure I get this right. All right, so it's a majority. All right, so all in favor of voting to reconsider the adoption of the report with the ability to, clean up for, non-substantive edits, please go ahead and vote if you're in favor.
Antonio, can you repeat that again, please?
Yes, we are currently, thank you. We are currently voting to reconsider the adoption of the report along with the ability to give the report writers time to basically make non-substantive cosmetic edits. So we are voting on the reconsideration of that adoption. If we pass that, then we can make a different, we can adopt a different motion, for example. So if you're in favor of adopting a different motion, you would vote yes on this motion. If you're not, you would vote no. So is everyone clear on what's before you? All right, so all in favor of reconsideration, please vote. Go ahead and raise your hands. All right, thank you. Please lower your hands. All opposed, please raise your hands. All right, I believe that's 8-14. So the noes have it, so the motion will not be reconsidered. All right, we can now move to the next part of our agenda, which is, just one second. So we skipped past item 6 that was withdrawn from the agenda. So now we are on coordinating presentation logistics. So let me go ahead and add some time. Oh, just one second. I recognize Martha in the queue. Go ahead, Martha.
Can I make a motion?
Sure. Let me inform people as to just before you make a motion. So currently, we've now adopted the report. That is our recommendation to the board. If you recall, the board will be making its decision on this matter, or at least it's scheduled to do so on November 12th. And so this item is about coordinating the logistics for the presentation to the board. Go ahead, Martha.
I would like to make a motion that the writers of the report actually present this to the board with all the data. You guys did a tremendous amount of work. It's very deep. It has a lot of extras. It's complicated. And if you could make some slides to do that, so that brings that clarity and that piece together. So I would like to make a motion that the writers actually work to make slides and a presentation and actually present the material to the public and the board on November 12th.
Thank you. So Martha's motion is that the report writers present the contents of the report to the board on 11/12, but do so in a slide deck and create a slide deck. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, so I have a second. This is the time for discussion, debate, or a vote. And we have 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Greg.
Yeah, I believe during the first task force meeting, that presentation would be me doing it. I thought that was a motion that was made during the first meeting that I would be the one doing the board presentations with this task force recommendations.
Right. If you could refer back to that, the minutes of that presentation, it was presenting information to the task force, not to the board. So I would refer you to the minutes of that task force meeting.
I just want to say on record, I don't know if we've ever had the public do a board presentation, so I don't know if Trustee Jones may answer that or if that's a higher up question.
I can go ahead and answer. Yeah, I can go ahead and answer. Actually, I'll defer to Trustee Jones.
Well, I can say that back in the day, probably 12 years ago, I, as a member of the public, gave a presentation to the board. So I did it as a member of the public. I don't know if there's any board policy specific to it, but I know that it has been done in the past.
And as a member of the FAC, I'm tasked with also at times presenting information to the board. I know the CBOC does the same. They do an update to the board. In fact, one thing that the board has asked for is more frequent communications from its committees. And so that would take the nature of committee members making that presentation. Go ahead. I see Joyce in line.
I was just going to ask, Martha, I'm wondering if the motion you made is a proper motion, but I'm wondering if you need to submit this presentation and then our board members and or superintendent make the decision on who the presenters are. I'm not sure how that gets decided. So I would agree with that motion, but I'm just not sure we have the ability to compel them to take the public as the speakers. That's what I just want to say.
Go ahead, Trustee Jones.
So I think what typically happens when we get reports from committees, it's often the staff facilitator of the committee along with the chair or other members of the committee who have been elected to do the presentation. So that's how it often works, is we do hear reports from committees, and it's often a combination of the staff facilitator and the chair who has been elected, but it could be multiple people.
Thank you, Trustee Jones. Annie?
Yeah, I'd like to speak in favor of the motion. I think even though things may have been done a certain way previously or in the past, and in fact, we've learned from Trustee Jones that things were done multiple ways in the past, right? Just because a thing has occurred before doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way for it to occur, given all of these circumstances. And this task force, I trust that all of the report writers are very knowledgeable about the sections of the report that they have written, and it will be the most benefit to the board if the most knowledgeable people will be presenting.
Thank you. And Kevin has a clarifying question, and then we'll go directly to a vote. Kevin?
Yep. Yeah. I just wanted to ask a question to Trustee Jones. When she referred to elected representatives to discuss the issue on the board, would this motion itself count as one of those elections if we've suggested that the writers of the report go to the board meeting and discuss the report?
I don't know that there's policy guiding this. I can tell you my experience was I was on a PRAA safety subcommittee, so it was even a subcommittee, and I was elected to do a presentation by that committee, and so I gave the presentation on behalf of that subcommittee. So I would think that you all could elect whoever you would like to present for you. That I don't think that goes against any policies that I'm aware of, and it certainly has been the practice to allow committee members to present on behalf of committee that they're speaking for.
Yeah, and just one point, it would be, yeah, there's almost no functional difference between an election and an appointment. So the task force would be appointing the report writers to be the presenters of this slide deck that's based on the report. All right, so given that time is exhausted, we're now going to go ahead to a vote. So all in favor of having the report writers present to the board on November 12th, please go ahead and raise your hands. Okay, please lower your hands. All opposed? All right, the ayes have it with 16. Okay, so now we can go ahead and move to next steps. Let me go ahead and put a timer. All right. I think for a large part, okay, Annie, I don't recognize motions in the chat, but if you want to go ahead, I can recognize you.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to write out the motion for the clarification because I'd been thinking about this previously and had constructed a motion. So the motion that I'm putting forward would be the task force will have a town hall on Saturday, 11/7 at 3 p.m. in order to educate the public about what we have found and what is in the report. And during the town hall, the report writers, their names I've written out in the motion, will report to the attendees and also take questions from them about the findings of the task force.
Second.
I thank you so much for not having me have to restate it or construct it. I appreciate that. Brian, do we have a question? Sorry, you're on mute.
Yes, I believe, isn't there a little bit of a problem presenting this before we present it to the board, to any group?
So point of order?
No. So go ahead, Marie. I'll take your point of order.
Annie gets to speak in favor of her motion first.
I knew it would happen by the end of this meeting. Annie, go ahead and speak to your motion, and then I'll take Brian's question.
Yay! Yeah, no, I think that some of the rationale for the motion is inherent within the motion. I believe that we have maybe not a duty, but it would be a good idea at the very least to share all of this information we have found with the public. I know I certainly didn't know very much of it before I joined this task force, and I would posit that many members of the public who have skin in the game, either students or parents of students, maybe even teachers and community members, aren't aware of a lot of this information. And I really believe in community education. I think when the community has all of the facts, they can advocate for the things that will best serve them. And I would like to have an event where the community can be educated on this topic.
Thank you. Brian's question would it be right to you can go ahead and try to speak. It's just it was garbled, so go ahead.
Oh, no problem. Can you hear me okay now?
No, let me see if I can recapture your question. Would it be appropriate, given that the board will not make its determination until 11/12? My understanding of Annie's motion is that it would be talking about our recommendation and not any decision. Obviously, that decision belongs to the board. Speaking of the board, so unfortunately, we're out of time, but I will take first Trustee Jones's question, and then I'll take Kevin's amendment. Go ahead, Trustee Jones.
I just have more of a logistical question. If something like this occurs and we're expecting it to potentially be broadcast and have community input, and we're doing something on a Saturday and that requires district staff, I am not sure which bargaining unit the staff members responsible for broadcasting. Is that SCIU, CSCI? I'm not sure we may come into a logistical issue with staff time, and we'd need to look into that.
This is clearly a volunteer-driven force, so I would definitely understand that that is a logistical problem to be sorted out. Kevin, you have an amendment, and we are out of time, so we will have to resolve the amendment immediately if it gets a second.
Got you. Yeah, my amendment is to perhaps get some student representatives into the town hall. Yeah, maybe like all of them. I don't know how to. I want to keep it open-ended, but just to require that some student representative attends the town hall because, or I mean, am I allowed to give an explanation, or should I just give the?
No, but you can't. But I need the motion because we're out of time. I need the motion to be constructed. So, do you have a number in place, like a number of student representatives that you would like to be added to the presenting at this town hall?
Sure.
Or would it be open-ended? I just need to make sure I can craft the motion.
Open-ended.
Okay, so an open-ended number of student representatives to join the panel to present to the community. That's the amendment.
Yes, I actually don't know about the presentation part, but the minimum should just be that they are present as a parent, as advocates.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the motion as constructed.
What about staff members?
So that would have been in order under an amendment, but currently we're discussing Kevin's amendment, so that this town hall be attended by student representatives, and that be an open-ended number. Okay, so do I have a second for that motion, for that amendment?
I second it.
All right, thank you, Priya. So all in favor of the that student representatives be allowed to join the town hall, basically on the panel, please raise your hand.
Point of information?
Sure, go ahead.
I just have a question. Can you amend an amendment, or do you have to amend the motion?
You can amend an amendment. You can do secondary amendments. However, we are out of time, so I would need an extension of time in order to do that.
Okay.
All right. So, Martha, go ahead.
I move we expend for 1 minute so that Marie can do whatever she wants to do.
All right. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All right.
The construction of the motion, by the way, Martha.
Okay. So all in favor of extending for a minute, please raise your hands. Please lower your hands. All opposed? All right. Go ahead, Marie.
I would like to amend Kevin's amendment that the student representatives that are on the presenting panel be students who voted for the report, as the purpose of the town hall is to present the report, not to debate it.
All right, so that the student so that right now we have an amendment that the student representatives who join the town hall be student representatives who voted in favor of the report. Do I have a second? All right, I have seconds. All right, so all in favor of this amendment to the main motion, but again, we're only talking about the very primary amendment, the secondary amendment, which is that student members who are invited to this panel be those who voted in favor of the report. All right, all in favor, please raise your hands. All right, just 1 second. Please keep your hands raised. Okay, please lower your hands. All opposed? No raising 2 hands. All right, thanks. The ayes have it. So now we are inviting students to be on the panel as attendees who voted in favor of the report. So that's the motion we're voting on right now. So all in favor, please raise your hands. All right, please keep your hands raised. All right. right, so all opposed, please raise your hands. Okay, is that a clarifying question, Sal? Otherwise, we're out of time, so we don't have time for debate. Go ahead.
So my understanding is that what was voted on is only kids that voted to support the report.
Sorry, what is your question?
So my question is, are the only kids able to show up to this and speak, or are the kids that have agreed with this report? Is that my understanding?
Yes, anyone can attend, but as for the panelists, it would be student representatives who voted in favor of the report. Correct.
So
we've adopted that amendment.
Okay, so in terms of folks being able to have a discussion around that, that's not going to be an option for the kids that may or may not have access to even look at the report?
Sorry, no. So now that's a discussion / debate. I believe I've answered your question.
I did put that in there prior to me writing.
I know, but we've exhausted time on this item, so that's why all the debate closes. You can extend for time. That's available to you, and as long as the task force agrees, then we can engage in this discussion.
I'm going to ask for 1 minute. I have one question.
All right. So do I have a second?
I second that.
All right. So all in favor of extending this discussion for 1 minute, please raise your hands. Okay, please keep your hands raised. No, please keep them raised. If you're in favor of extending for 1 minute, I need to count. Okay. All right, 1, 2. Okay, please keep your hands raised. People keep dropping them, and then I'm losing track. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All right. 13. Okay. All opposed, please raise your hands. Okay, the ayes have it. Go ahead, Sal. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, so I just have a question. There are a lot of kids in our community that don't have access or don't even know about this report. And I just want to make sure that every kid is heard and understands the work that we're doing as a committee. And I could tell you that that's probably not true. And there's certain attendance areas that are a little more involved than others because of access and because of other particulars. So I would push back against that part. So my question is, why wouldn't there be an opportunity for kids that may now be notified, hey, there's this date, if you're in support or not support, or you want more information to attend. I want to be able to share with my community, as I'm sure other principals will, that there's a particular meeting that might be occurring that they might want to speak on behalf. But to only limit it to kids that read the report and agree with the report, to me, that's not providing access for everybody.
Yeah, just to clarify.
I would like to speak.
Well, we're out of time, but also I just want to clarify for the benefit of the task force. The public will be invited to attend. That is the purpose of a town hall. So especially, I think we would highly benefit from students in attendance, whether they've read the report, whether they've not, etc. But attendance will be open to the public.
But Kevin had said in terms of representatives, the only people that were going to be able to speak on behalf were kids that actually supported the report. That was my understanding.
Sure. And so let me just clarify for the benefit of the group, because we now have to take it to a vote. This was Kevin's motion was about panelists at the town hall. So people who would be presenting, all students would be welcome to attend the town hall. All right, so now we are voting on the motion that the task force will have a town hall on Saturday, 11/7 at 3 p.m. in order to educate the public about what was found and what was in the report. During the town hall, the report writers, it lists them out, plus certain student representatives of those who voted in favor of the report will present, I believe it's now in the chat, will present the report to the attendees and take questions from them about our findings. So that is the motion that's before you. So all in favor of the motion as written, please raise your hands. and please keep them raised while I count. Thank you so much. Okay. All right. All opposed, please raise your hands now. All right, I count that second hand, Sal. All right, it's still the ayes have it. Okay, so that concludes our meeting. Thank you all so much for the exhaustive efforts that everybody spent on this, and warm, heartfelt thank you to all of you. I think we've provided a tremendous amount of value to the board in making their decision on November 12th, and I look forward to discussing or to meeting with some of you on November 7th. Martha, is that a clarifying question? Otherwise, we're out of time.
Yeah, I have one clarifying question. Did we vote to do the town hall on Saturday?
Yeah, we just did.
Okay. That's what I thought, but I didn't realize.
That's good feedback for me. I may need to make motions clear.
Okay. So
all right. All right. Thank you, everybody, and have a good night.
Before the students go, can I reach out to them as for participation in the town hall? Yep.
I believe you have their email addresses. Like if you'd prefer to do it now, that's probably fine. But also it may be more convenient just to do it by email.
That's true. I guess I mean yeah, but finding it by email is also like trying to search for their emails in like a really long email chain. Yeah, for those that want to come, can you please link your Gmails or messenger contact, however it works for you, so we can like all discuss who wants to come to the meeting, to the town hall.
Maybe you put your email in the chat.
And even present, you would be on the panel.
Yeah, just for students.
I think if you like reach out to the Surfboard E, like since they chose the 6 of us, they could give you all of our emails as well if that's a little bit faster. Or
Oh, I mean, I'm not sure if it's faster than like literally talking to you guys here.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine.
Can I leave now? I really appreciate you guys.
Bye. All right, yeah. Yep, thank you.
I'll also say that I think there are only 4 out of the 6 of you right now.
Oh, interesting.
Or like in this meeting, everyone else left.
All right, we can definitely find